Hey you guys, and welcome back to my channel. It's Maria. I'm so excited to be doing my January wrap-up today and a baby little February TBR. I'm not going to spoil too much about what I'll be reading in February because I have some really fun plans for videos about them. So I read 10 books in the month of January, and I'm currently in the middle of 3 books, so 13-ish, but I have not completed 13. It was a really good reading month, pretty solid. I'll get more into the books right now. Like I said, fairly happy with that number. I'm hoping to maybe read a few more in February, but I did just move to a new apartment and start like going into work in person kind of. I got the COVID vaccine, so it's been really hectic. So I'm really happy with that number. The first book that I read, I've already talked to you guys about a little bit, and that was Inheritance by Christopher Paolini. I finally finished the freaking Eragon series. I thought I would never get there. I gotta thank my friend Kaushik, who I was reading the series with. He really kept me going and inspired me to actually finish out the series, but I actually was pleasantly surprised by the last book. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was pretty solid. My issue with the Eragon series for the most part is that I felt like it was slow, but I'm fine with slow fantasy books. I just felt like it was slow in unnecessary ways. Like there were things that were included that were just dwarf politics that weren't that necessary, that went on for too long. So Inheritance didn't have that. I felt like things were moving. It was like the first book in the series where I was like, yes, I want to know what happens. I'm really intrigued. I liked the way the final battle happened. That was really cool. I liked the twist. My criticism, and the reason I gave it 4 out of 5 stars, is because Christopher Paolini spends 80 pages at the end of the book, or about there, I don't quite remember, but it was a significant chunk of the book. After the final conflict is resolved, he spends some time trying to wrap things up, and I liked that a lot. But I felt like he didn't wrap things up in the way that I wanted as a reader after reading so many thick books. There were some things that I felt loose ends that were not tied up, things that I wanted to see that he just kind of left open-ended, and I feel like after you've had your reader go through reading these 4 big, thick books where you spent like 150 pages on dwarf politics, I think that you can include some more nicely wrapped up things or not leaving things as open-ended as I think he did. So that's my like major criticism. There were some characters I wanted to see, like how they ended up. There was some stuff about the world and the politics and the society that I wanted to see how that would wrap up. So that's my criticism. But overall, I actually really liked this one. I felt like it was more fast-paced. It was more interesting. There were some really cool twists and turns. So definitely a fun book to start the year off with. I didn't read the entirety of this book in January. I think I told you guys that. I actually finished it on New Year's Day, so I'm still talking about it because I finished it in January, but definitely not like my first read of the year. Then I read Sincerely Life by Poonam Desai, and I gave this about like 3 stars out of 5, 3.5 stars out of 5. It was a really solid read. I have an extensive review of it on Goodreads and Storygraph, so I will be linking those down below if you're interested in reading them. But let me give you like a little general gist of what this book is about. This book is told from the perspective of life, and it's kind of a self-help book, but what I think makes it really unique compared to other self-help books is that at the end, this book is split up into days. So every day is a different topic, and it's like split up into sections too. I kind of delineate this better in my written review, but at the end of each day, you have these action items, these checklist items, where you can do some things to actually implement the advice that life has given you, which I think is really cool because I often find that when I've read the few self-help books that I have read, they tend to not really give you a way to implement the advice. They just give you some advice. They're like, you should be more chill. And you're like, okay, but how though? I liked that the advice and the checklist items seem to be based in some real psychology, so highly recommend it for that. If you are at a place in your life where you're feeling a little lost or you want to figure out some more stuff about your personality and work on yourself, I think it's really cool. The stuff that wasn't as much for me were the prose sections before the checklists. I'm not a really big fan of like flowery, life-considering prose. It's just not for me. It often feels cheesy and like kind of superficial, even though it's supposed to be deep. I did like some of the poetry at the beginning of the chapters, but yeah, the prose, not as much for me. Didn't really like life talking to me. It felt weird and like a little cringy sometimes, but definitely recommend it for the poetry portions and the action items at the the end of the days. Those are really cool. And I know some people who love that kind of flowery prose, so if that's up your alley, like definitely pick this up. Next, I read Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore, and I gave this about 4 out of 5 stars. I had such a good time reading this. I read it in about a day, 2 days. It was so good. I loved it. Like I said, 4 out of 5 stars. Not like the craziest, best book in the whole world, but it was so fun. Such a cute romance. So we have our main character, Annabelle, who is a very intelligent woman, but she is like a peasant woman, and she convinces her uncle to let her go study at Oxford, and you know, women are only starting to be allowed to go to Oxford, and even then, like, they're not really allowed in the main classes. They have to like find a professor to let them study with them, and she gets involved with the suffragist movement. They're fighting for women to be able to own land so that they can vote, and she encounters the Duke, Sebastian, our male lead figure character person, and obviously sparks fly. They're instantly attracted to each other. This was the perfect amount of like romance for me. It wasn't too, I mean, obviously it's a romance book, but I felt like there was plot in there. I liked the characters. There weren't too many saucy scenes. There were just enough that I was like, yes, this is good, but not too much that I felt like it took away from the plot, because sometimes I feel like people sacrifice plot for sex scenes, which is another genre in and of itself. It's just not really for me. So loved it. So cute. Had a great time. I'm so excited to read the next books in the series. There's one more that's out and a third that's coming out this year, so I will definitely be picking those up. If you're looking for like a Bridgerton-esque book, I recommend this one. It's a little less problematic than the first Bridgerton book was, and it's very entertaining and well written and fun. Next, I finally picked up From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I borrowed this from my library. Same with Bringing Down the Duke. Used my library a lot this month. I'm thriving. Love the SF Public Library. I gave this book about 4 out of 5 stars. I loved it. Let me tell you, my reading experience with this book. I've never read a Jennifer L. Armentrout book ever. I know that it was super popular on BookTube, but I'm not gonna lie, I feel like when I was in high school on BookTube, not the series for me. Like, I was a little 15, 16-year-old Bubba just trying to make her way on BookTube. I don't think her books would have necessarily been for me, but now as like a 23-year-old, I'm thriving. I am loving it. I cannot wait to read the second one. So what happened is I borrowed this book and everyone had been talking about it. Reagan from Peruse Project read it, then Elena from Elena the Great read it, and I was like, okay, I love both of these ladies and I love their recommendations, and they both said they enjoyed it way more than they expected to. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna jump right in. Right from the get-go, I was so intrigued. It was so fun to the point where I would come out of my room and tell my housemate like what the chapters had been about. So she now knows the entirety of the plot of the first book and everything that happens. And we're doing a book club, so I'm gonna make her read the second book even though she hasn't read the first book. It's going to be a journey. But the book is essentially about our main character, Poppy, who is the maiden of the society. When people kept saying that, I didn't understand what being the maiden of this society meant. Literally, like, there's a person called a maiden in this society, and she is it. And it means you've, like, been chosen by the gods, and there's all these rules you have to follow. Like, people can't see what your face looks like her hair is always hidden. No one really, like, if she took her veil off and walked around, no one would know that it was her, that she was the maiden. She has an encounter, kind of sexual, with this man named Hawk in, like, a pub in sordid place. Sordid. To her, it's sordid. And it's, like, kind of weird, and that threw me off. And then he becomes her guard, and it's about that. It's about them, and also just the society and her, like, discovering things that she's been lied to about, and all sorts of things are revealed and uncovered. I'm not gonna lie, just by discussing this with my housemate who hadn't even read it, I figured out, like, half of the plot points, maybe 75% of the plot points, but that doesn't matter because I had such a good time reading. I cannot wait for the second book. Like, I cannot wait to read it. I'm waiting because we're reading a different book for our book club first, and then we're gonna get to this one, but it was so good in such a fun way. Like, it was what I needed. I needed something kind of, like, light but interesting and fantastical with, like, mysteries to solve and just so many fun elements, and the saucy scenes were saucy, let me tell you. So definitely pick this up if it sounds like something you'd be into. Don't go into this super critically, just, like, have a good time with it. Next, I read Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, about 4.75 on the story graph. And the reason I gave it like 4.75 is just because there was a lot of info dumping at the beginning. That was a lot for me, and it took away from the story. I also think From Blood and Ash did the same thing, like that info dumping. It kind of makes sense because our main character like doesn't know anything, so people have to explain things to her, but it still was frustrating to read sometimes. I'd get really lost, and I felt like my little brain just could not keep up. But I gave it 5 out of 5 on Goodreads instead of like rounding down to 4 because, oh my god, this book was so good. My housemate and I would sit on the couch reading it, and we would just gasp at different intervals. Like, she was reading on her Kindle, I was reading my book, and we were just sitting there shooketh. It was so amazing. I tweeted at Tracy Deonn, and she responded to me, and now I'm a fangirl for the rest of my life. Let's talk about what this book is about. We have our main character, Bree, who is, I thought originally this was going to be set like with college age people. No. This is actually about Bree, who is 16 and in high school, but she gets accepted to this like accelerated honors program on the UNC campus. So that's where she goes with her friend, and she witnesses a magical attack on like her first day in the area and realizes that there could be something related to her mother's death. So her mother has died before all of this happened, and she's been grieving a lot. Her relationship with her father is very strained, and she's really looking to leave home. It turns out the magical attack is linked to this Arthur Knights of the Round Table related society, and it's about you know, and her learning about the society, her place in it, figuring all this stuff out. And there's this element, obviously, of, you know, microaggressions and overt racism that she's experiencing while she's doing this, because the society is typically all white people. So that is another element of the story that kind of gives it a depth. In addition to that, the way that history and like historical trauma in terms of like the oppression and enslavement of Black people in America, the way that is woven into the story and into the fantastical elements, it's incredible. Like, it's so well done. That's why I gave this 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. I mean, it's so impressive and so well thought out and so good that I was just floored. Like, the whole time I was reading, it's just amazing. I want to talk about it more in a review, so hopefully I'll be doing that soon, but man, this was so freaking good. Like, I just think everyone needs to pick this up. Even if you don't really read YA fantasy a lot of the time, I think you will get a lot out of this book. And it's so impressive. Like I said, I mean, my mouth would fall open while reading, like at twists and turns. Oh, I cannot say enough good things about this book. Like I said, super, super unique, super good, a great perspective, and just so well done. So freaking well done. People would say things to Bree, like microaggressions and just like overtly racist things that made me want to claw my eyes out. Not my eyes out, actually, the person who said it. I would want to claw their eyes out. Like, it just made me so angry. And like, this book made me feel so many feelings all the time. And it was so good. So, so good. Just read it. Next, throughout the month, I listened to the audiobook of Find Me in Havana by Serena Burdick. And this was sent to me by NetGalley. I requested it on NetGalley. And this is definitely not what I expected it was going to be. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars because of the premise of the book. So I also wrote a review of this. Highly recommend checking that out on Goodreads. My thoughts will be more eloquent. I wrote it right after I finished it. This book was hard to read in the sense that the amount of trigger warnings, like, I just recommend going to look at my review for the trigger warnings I included, because there are so many that, like, reading them out to you right now would take forever. Every traumatic thing that you can possibly think of, for the most part, happens in this book. It is so dark and so gruesome. The element of, like, a theme of misogyny and, like, men using women is just so rampant throughout the story. It's a historical fiction book, so it's based off of a real-life story of Estelita Rodriguez and her daughter Nina Lopez. And it's their story from when Nina is super young to, like, her growing up and her mother's death. And it is freaking heartbreaking, not only within their personal relationship and their family relations, but there's an element of, like, Che Guevara and Fidel Castro. Like, Che Guevara is a character in this book. Like, Nina Lopez is still alive, and that's how the book was written. I think she commissioned an author to write this story, and the author was originally just going to write about the mother, but then the more she heard about it, she realized it really was a story about mother and daughter. And just thinking about all the crap that this woman went through, crap isn't even a good word to describe the stuff that she went went through. I mean, it was insane. I can't even imagine. Like, the trauma that she must carry after all that was so heartbreaking. I mean, that's all I kept thinking while I was reading. I was like, this is real. This happened to this woman and her mother. It was so heartbreaking and so gruesome at times. I would have to stop reading and just take a second. This, I know based on the cover, this kind of looks like a Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This is not. This is not that vibe. This is a dark story. But there is a bit of like a hopeful ending at the end, which I really loved. I loved that this story that was so painful and heartbreaking kind of ended on a note that I really didn't expect. There are just so many important elements to this story, but I also recognize that this is a very hard story to read or listen to. So definitely go in when you're like in a good mental space that would be able to take handling that kind of content. And if that content is not something you can handle, I don't recommend picking this up, but the writing was really good. The plot was a lot. That's all I can say. It was just a lot, and check out the trigger warnings in my review that I will link down below. Next, for the readathon, Down Memory Jane, I will link more information about the readathon down below. I read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. 5 out of 5 stars. It was my first 5 out of 5 stars of the month. It's one of my favorite books of all time. It's so freaking good. I just can't recommend it enough. It's a classic for a reason. I know a lot of people aren't a fan of Jane Austen because they're like, well, she just writes love stories and that's it. Like, that's not good. It's not even well written. That's wrong. I'm just gonna say that's wrong. I mean, you're entitled to your opinion, but also that's wrong. There is so much wittiness and purposefulness to the way she crafts her story and the commentary on society, the way she crafts her characters to challenge society, even while still kind of remaining in the bounds of it. You know, it's not too crazy, but it's subtle enough that it's just so good. Like, I love this book. It's my favorite out of all of Jane Austen's books. I can't really say that because I've only read 4 of the 6, but I'm going to be reading all of them this year. I love this book. It's so good. You obviously should know what it's about. You have to read it and then watch the Colin Firth version. I'm going to say it right now. The Keira Knightley version is fine when I like kind of want some Pride and Prejudice in my life really quickly, but it will never compare to the Colin Firth version. I don't care what anyone says to me. It's not as good. Keira Knightley is not a Lizzie to me. I mean, I like Keira Knightley. It's just it wasn't what I pictured in my head. So go read it and then watch the Colin Firth adaptation ASAP. Next, I read I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness by Austen Channing Brown. This book is a memoir, essentially, from Austen Channing Brown's perspective. So she is a Black woman with a white man's name. So the beginning talks a lot about that and how growing up, people never believed that it was her name, not just because it was a male name, but it was a white male name, and her experiences in the job application process as a result of that. And, you know, how people, when she walks into a room, they're expecting a white man and they get a Black woman, and the reactions and how that can be really unsettling for her. And even when people don't really mean to be problematic or, you know, offensive, their reactions are very clear. There's also an element of Christianity in this book, as Austen Channing Brown is Christian, and she also works for a lot of nonprofits and teaching a lot of white Christian people about racism and about inherent racism and how systemic racism and oppression has been putting Black people down for so long. I kid you not, there is a section of the book where she talks about going on this like school trip and to a plantation, and the people at the plantation talk about how the slaves were happy, and then they have people pick cotton. There were just a lot of moments like that where I just questioned so much our education system and like people's general lack of empathy and caring about all the issues our country faces in terms of being really, really like disgustingly awful to Black people. So this book really opened my eyes to a lot of things, in the sense that a lot of it was stuff I had already read, in the sense of like what not to do, like what is problematic, what is offensive, and what is just like unsettling and bad to do. But the things that really my eyes were opened to was I felt like I had kind of a sense of hope before reading this book. And the end was like, yeah, a lot of white people have hope about it because they're not still dealing with it. They don't have to see the daily reminder that it's still really prevalent. We're probably not, even in the next few generations, going to see like the eradication of racism. Like, it's going to take a very, very long time. So the way the book ended kind of like instilled a sense of hopelessness in me, but in not necessarily a bad or good way, just like it kind of checked me and made me more realistic in terms of what was going to happen. Yeah, I felt like it checked me a little bit, which was really good, and I appreciated that, and that's why I'm trying to read more books like this, just to learn more and educate myself and, like, be a better ally, because the fight is still going, my dudes. You know, we might not be in that period of the summer where everyone was sharing links and places to donate and stuff, but, like, we still should be, because it's really important and really relevant. So I do recommend this book, especially if you're a white Christian. I think that this will impact you a lot. The reason I gave it 4 out of 5 stars is because from a literary perspective, some parts of this book did not flow together very well. It occasionally felt very choppy and not quite, it just didn't flow as well as some of the other books on this topic that I've read about, but overall, still highly recommend it. Definitely check it out. It is really beautifully written and painfully written, and I think that everyone should be reading more books like this. Next, I read The Frog Princess Returns by Edie Baker, and if you're a long-term subscriber, you'll know that I actually read most of this series when I first started my channel, and it was super fun. I did it for like a booktubeathon back in the day, I think, and I loved it. It's one of my favorite children's series. The series follows our main character Emma, who is a princess, and she meets a frog who says he's a prince and that if she kisses him, he'll turn to a human, but she ends up kissing him and he turns into a frog. It's like the Frog Princess movie, but a book form, and I don't know which came first. I think the series came first, but I'm not 100% sure, but they go on adventures, they fall in love, they have kids later on, like the books are about the kids, and so this one is actually not, because the first 4 are about Emma and Edric, who is the prince. The next 4 are about their kids. And so then this book had come out while I was in college and I had no idea. And it was about Emma and Edric again, like before getting married, before having kids. And it's just so sweet. I read it so quickly, but I recommend this children's series a lot. I think it's really cute, really sweet, really fast read, and overall 4 out of 5 stars. Sorry if the location shifted. I had some technical difficulties with my webcam and my lighting, so I think I fixed it. But the last book that I read in January was A Dead Djinn in Cairo by P. Djeli Clark, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed this. It was a short story, or kind of novella. It's like 45 pages, not super long. The premise is that our main character Fatma is a kind of like magical mystery detective person. So somebody has opened like a portal to this other world that has all these magical creatures, and ever since then, you know, she and some other people have to kind of like patrol the area and solve mysteries that are like magical creature related. And so this time they find a dead djinn that has like lost all his blood. They need to figure out why, what's going on. There's like some weird stuff happening, and I can't say much more because it is a short story, so anything I say, it'll kind of defeat the purpose of reading the short story, but I really enjoyed it. I feel like I was learning there were a lot of Arabic words here that I was constantly looking up and learning. That was really interesting. I learned more about like Egypt's layout and like different terminology. So overall, that was really cool. I definitely recommend, if you're going to read this, don't just like skim past those parts. Like, look up words, learn a little bit. It's really, really cool and really interesting. And I'm excited to read the next 2. It's like Tramcar 015 and then The Master of the Jinn. So very excited for that. I think it's going to be really good, and I do recommend reading it. It's a very quick read, very fun. So the books I'm currently reading are What the Wind Knows by Amy Harmon. I'm 2/3 away through that. I'm reading it with my friend, and we read a third every 2 weeks and then discuss it. So I've caught up to the second third, and we're going to talk about it next weekend, and then I'll be finishing it. So that's why I haven't finished it yet. It's low-key like Irish Outlander. We have our main character, Anne Gallagher. She grows up in the US with her grandfather. Her parents are dead, and he teaches her how to like speak in an Irish accent and do all sorts of things, and she's a writer. And then her grandfather dies, and he says, you gotta take my ashes and spread them over the loch. And so she goes back to Dromahair, where he's from, and she spreads it out, and then she transports herself to a different time, to when her grandfather was still a baby, and she meets his like kind of surrogate father who raised him, Thomas, and they're like fallen in love. But there's an undercurrent of like the Irish Revolution. There's war and skirmishes between the British and Ireland, but then there's also tensions within Ireland and different people who think they should do different things. It's Ireland in 1921, so I'm loving the historical element of it. I think it's really cool. There are some things that I'm not loving in the sense of like plot points and things that I just find unrealistic. Like, obviously time travel is not realistic. I get that, but also it's not just, like, there are things that even within the context of time travel don't make sense, and so some of the things that happen, I'm like, that's not realistic. I don't understand. So I'm excited to see how it ends and how everything happens, and I will have a more fleshed out review once I finish it and really see what happens. Next, I'm reading She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. I got this from NetGalley, and I am so excited. It's described as Mulan meets the Song of Achilles, and I am really enjoying it. I'm only like 4 chapters in, so I really shouldn't talk about it too much yet until I have a really fleshed out vibe of the book. I also want to say that I'm not fully certain how to pronounce all the names in this book. I did look up some pronunciation guides, but there was a lot of conflicting information, so if you know how to pronounce the names I'm about to say and I'm saying them wrong, please let me know. I really want to learn how to say these correctly, especially in my head. I've been trying to practice. The land is not producing crops, and people are starving, and people think it's because the emperor is like a cursed emperor and it's his fault. And our main character, who we don't know the name of in the beginning, we reference her as Zhu from later on because of some things that happen, but her family has almost all died except for her father and her brother, and then some bandits come and kill her father, and then her brother dies either out of grief or shock, and we start the story where, you know, the brother has gotten this prediction that he is destined for greatness, and when she asks what her destiny is, they say she's destined for nothingness. And so after her brother dies, she remembers he was supposed to be taken to become a monk in the city, and so she assumes his identity and becomes Zhu Chongba and pretends to be him. So that's like the Mulan element, like the, you know, she's the man kind of vibe. And since I'm only a few chapters in, like not really sure what the full plot is, it's just so far been about her like becoming a monk and trying not to be discovered, and I'm really excited to see how it continues to go. I am really enjoying it. It's beautifully written, just stunning world building so far, and I'm loving it. And lastly, I have been reading Becoming by Michelle Obama. I've been listening to the audiobook, taking my time with it. It is amazing. Number one, it's well written. You can tell that she took her time to create this. This was not just a rushed job for the sake of having an autobiography, and it's just so well woven, you know, even from the beginning when we're talking about her childhood, because that's where I am right now. You can see where that's going to lead later on, and she drops hints, but it's not too much, it's not scatterbrained, it's just the right amount of like foreshadowing. She also weaves history through it, and it's so impressive and so well done, and I am just loving it. I am having a great time listening to that when I commute to work every now and then. It's just been so good, and I can't recommend it enough. So in terms of some books I'm planning on reading, I'm only going to tell you like 3 of them at random because I like to leave in a little bit of mystery. I'm going to be reading Blood Ex Libris by Raven Belasco, and if you don't know why, it's for my Romanian Representation Reads project, and I'll be linking down below and also putting a card up here somewhere of my intro video, my explanation video. Please go watch that. I'm really proud of that video, and I think that it will explain better why I'm doing it and what I'm doing it for. But yes, Blood Ex Libris, first book in that series. Like I said, I'm going to be reading A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire by Jennifer L. Armentrout with my housemate eventually at some point this month. And the last book that I'm going to say that I'm going to read next month is Tell Them of Battles, Kings, and Elephants by Matthias Enard. And this is like a book that was originally written in French and translated into English. My housemate picked it for our book club, and I'm very excited. I'm kind of going in a little blind, but I I think it's going to be really good. It sounds like it's going to be a lot of thought-provoking content, so I'm ready for that, and I can't wait to read it. So thank you for sticking around this lengthy video. Lots of books to talk about, but I hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you have read any of these, if you plan on reading any of them. Did you enjoy them? Did not enjoy them? Just let me know. I'm curious. What did you read in January? I want all the updates from you guys. I love it when you comment. Remember to like this video if you enjoyed it. It kind of helps keep my morale up. If you haven't subscribed and you like watching my videos, please subscribe. Again, helps boost my morale. I'm trying to get back to 2K. I had hit 2K a few years ago, and then obviously being gone for so long, lost 2K, so I would like to go up again. Not that I do this for subscribers, but obviously, like, I want people to watch my content and give me feedback and start book discussions. As always, in the description, I put my Goodreads, my Twitter, my Instagram, and all that fun stuff, so definitely check them out if you want to connect with me there. Like I said, comment, subscribe, like, all the basic YouTube spiel stuff, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.